Jessica Corneille is a research psychologist focused on altered states of consciousness. She has a master's degree in psychology and is involved with organizations such as the Scientific and Medical Network, the Galileo Commission, and the Psychedelic Society. Following her own incredible experience, a spontaneous spiritual awakening, Jessica's world changed and she realized there was so much more to reality than she was previously aware of. She's also a Kundalini Yoga teacher and runs support groups for people going through spiritually transformative experiences. As always, we've taken the time to create timestamps which can be found in the description below. Okay, so Jess, to start us off, can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a research psychologist and I specialize in spontaneous spiritual awakening experiences and other non-ordinary states of consciousness. And I'm also a Kundalini Yoga teacher, and I run peer support groups for individuals who've had profound spiritually transformative experiences with the Psychedelic Society, which I think you may have heard of. Mm-hmm. And then I do a number of other things. So that's sort of my career's background. In terms of who I am, I mean, that's quite a complex question, but I suppose in many ways I've changed a lot in the last 6 years. So I'm definitely not the same person now than I was before my experience, which I'm sure we'll delve into shortly. Yeah. But yeah, I grew up in a quite a multicultural household. I'm half Italian, half French, born and raised in London, so I'm a Londoner. And yeah, I grew up an atheist, very much rejectant of anything pertinent to the spiritual or the religious. And yeah, I'd never really delved into anything of the esoteric type or anything like that. And I remember, of course I remember, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. When I was a teenager, I did like 1 or 2 Buddhist meditation classes at the local church of all places. Yeah. That sort of, it didn't really open up my mind towards these kinds of experiences or anything like that, but I knew that I liked it. And then when I went to uni at Leeds University, where I did my bachelor's, I undertook I did some yoga there with the Yoga Society. But again, I didn't know what this was all about. I just knew that it made me feel good physically and mentally. Yeah. But I didn't know anything about spirituality until about 6 years ago. Yeah. So.
Wow. So you grew up an atheist. So were both your parents atheists when you were growing up?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
Well, I would say agnostic more than atheist.
Okay, that's an important distinction. So up until your kind of spiritual awakening experience, would you say you kind of kept your atheist status until then?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay, and before we go into your experience, how could you kind of tell us like what exactly is a spiritual awakening? And I guess in more detail, like, can it be? Obviously, it can be, like in your case, a kind of spontaneous spiritual experience, but can it also be a very gradual experience that maybe lasts for weeks, months, even years? Just kind of give a little bit more of an idea of what that is, a spiritual awakening, if you don't mind. Yeah,
sure. So there is still an issue with the term spiritual awakening because according to different traditions, different people, we all have a different sort of idea of what that looks like. But according to, what I've researched, everything that I've read, and my own personal experience and my intuition, a spiritual awakening is an experience of connection or communion or non-dual merging or experience of oneness with a perceived, with the universe, with a perceived cosmic consciousness, with the divine, or with what some may term as called God. I wouldn't call it necessarily God, like one God, because that is the word God has ties that are too tightly knit with things that I don't necessarily believe in. But anyway, it's this sense of interconnection, this sense of all-pervading oneness with something greater than ourselves, but that also exists within ourselves. That's how I would describe spiritual awakening, and other people call it experiences of enlightenment, if sustained for long enough, or experiences of non-duality, when the experience is strong enough and you lose the sort of boundaries fully with the outside world and you perceive yourself as just one, or experiences of self-realization. There are lots of different ways to describe these kinds of experiences, and they can be gradual. Of course, I've had a spontaneous, very powerful and spontaneous one, so I don't know what it feels like to have a gradual experience, but from what I've heard from other people, and again, the research that I've done, yes, they can be gradual, of course, and they can occur particularly during or after a sustained practice of meditation over years, or yoga, or just through, slowly opening our minds to the idea that there might be something more than what we can see with our two eyes and our five senses.
Is there... Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, nothing.
No. Is there also potentially some kind of causal link, not like with depression or something like that? Is it possible that a period of depression can maybe ignite a kind of gradual spiritual awakening? Have you ever come across that?
Yeah, definitely. Gradual, but also spontaneous. So what we found in our own research project, the one that I led for my master's dissertation and that I then published with David Luke, is that I think 65% of all of our participants, so we handed out surveys to 152 individuals, and I think around 65% of them reported having experienced a prolonged period of psychological trauma or turmoil prior to their experience. So they weren't necessarily able to pinpoint a specific trigger, but that was a sort of a preempting factor that 65% of our participants actually reported. So that's quite significant. And this is something that we've seen in other studies on more general spiritual awakenings, so not necessarily spontaneous ones. In the studies of Dr. Steve Taylor, for example, if you've come across his work, I'm very much aligned with his way of thinking and his way of doing research. And he's found something very similar. So, vast majority of the individuals that he's interviewed for his own studies have reported a period of psychological trauma or turmoil prior to their experience. I think, we don't really know the reasons why. Yeah. But of course, I suppose, I don't know the inner workings of trauma well enough. I'm actually reading a wonderful book by Van der Kolk. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but it's The Body Keeps the Score. So good, highly recommend. But maybe I'll know a little bit more about trauma and the inner workings of trauma after that. But it is true that trauma can give us when we're stripped of everything that we know, when we face severe loss, for example, of somebody that we love, we are faced with our own inner selves in a much purer way in many respects. We're sort of stripped of all of the layers of conditioning through which we saw the world until that moment of trauma or turmoil. And so it probably gives way to a different sense of existing and a different way of viewing and perceiving the world.
Wow. Yeah. And again, this is just my kind of speculation, but I guess like if somebody's gone through like a period of depression or going through a period of depression, you kind of become like disillusioned with the world around you, the reality that you've grown up with and that you've become so used to, like the kind of four walls around you, that the only thing you've ever known. And all of a sudden, I guess maybe you begin to crave for something more, or you begin to look for something more, search for something more, and then you begin to find some answers. And then maybe you just kind of keep going further into that. Maybe that's something to do with it as well, but it's probably much more complicated.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a lot more complicated, but yes, symbolically speaking, it's almost like sometimes you need a shake up in your life to be able to see past what you know, and to be able to maybe experience in a more objective reality. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think it's possible to induce a spiritual awakening either in yourself, or like if somebody's watching this like, oh, I want one, like, is it possible to induce that? Or is it possible even to kind of help somebody else that you know to have one? Like, is there anything that, as far as you're aware, I suppose meditation, maybe you kind of mentioned earlier, anything else that would help with that?
Yeah, I mean, you can't predict somebody having a spiritual awakening experience. Some people meditate their whole lives and will never have one. Others are, experienced psychonauts and have never had that full-blown, mystical experience where they experience themselves as totally non-dual with everything around them. So you can't predict it, but of course there are certain practices that might be might more easily facilitate something like a spiritual awakening. So meditation, but there's various forms of meditations, of course. So chanting, breath work is very, very powerful for shifting states of consciousness. And I feel like breath work is a very quick way of attaining an altered state, definitely. So perhaps more conducive to these kinds of awakening experiences. Of course, yoga. So a variety of spiritual contemplative practices. And then things like ecstatic dance. And I don't necessarily mean in an ecstatic dance setting as we know them, because it's become sort of a trend now, which I love. But, that's not the only way to let yourself go to the music and go fully inwards and just let everything out as a cathartic method. We've seen it time and time again in traditions all around the world, even things like being part of a drum circle, and letting loose to, in terms of movement to hypnotic drumming, or even just drumming yourself. Those can all be activities that increase our sort of state of absorption, and thus can be maybe more conducive to those experiences of oneness.
Wow. Yeah. That's cool. So I guess maybe it's time that I ask you to tell me about your experience that you had, like how, and maybe you kind of want to go back a few days before, or I don't know kind of what time frame, but what kind of state of mind were you in the lead up to that? Was it, I know it was spontaneous, but was it totally out of the blue? Like give me a little background in that sense, and then go ahead and please tell me about the experience in as much detail as you want to or feel comfortable to.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's impossible to describe it in a lot of detail because it's still ongoing in many ways. So 6 years down the line, and I'm still, reaping the fruits of what happened to me and trying to make sense of them. Yeah. But I guess in a nutshell, I had just moved to Madrid, I think a month and a half prior to the experience. And I was in a very exciting period of my life. I was making lots of new friends. I had my first post-uni job, kind of prolonged job that I knew that I was going to stay in, working in the preservation of cultural heritage and in art production. So I was very excited, very happy, kind of living the dream in Madrid. And I mean, nothing out of the ordinary apart from that massive thing, which was a big shift in my life, moving countries, making new friends, having a new job. But then I think it was a Saturday night or a Friday night. I can't remember right now, but I know that it was the night of the 19th of February, 2016.
Okay.
I didn't go out that night. I stayed in and I didn't even have a glass of wine or anything like that. I was completely sober, and I went to bed and I fell asleep. And the next morning when I woke up and opened my eyes, I just experienced, the most profound thing that I've ever experienced in my life.
Was it like immediately, sorry to interrupt, was it like you wake up and you kind of regain, your full consciousness and then just straight away?
Yeah, so I had a very profound lucid dream before waking up. And when I opened my eyes and woke up, the experience was instantaneous. And it was this incredible flood of, this love that I'd never experienced before. This all-pervading, breathing life energy in everything that I could see around the room. And this sense of noetic or intuitive or deeply experienced interconnection with everything and everyone around me in the universe. And I just had this incredible sense that there was an intelligence, or intelligence isn't the right word because it automatically brings us into the mind state. But this was a deeply felt experience. It was almost vibrational. this deep inner knowing that there was an intelligence or a benevolence or a consciousness that permeated and pervaded, or pervades still, the universe and everything around me. And it just filled me with so much bliss and so much peace. All the while I was bewildered and shocked, that I was having this experience. And I knew intuitively that it was a spiritual awakening, even though I'd never known what a spiritual awakening was before my experience. And I had this sense of light emanating from different parts of my body, notably from my heart space, my third eye, and the crown of my head. And it was as though these parts of my body were just not only emanating light, but also there was just this different inner sensation that I was feeling in those body centers. It almost felt like my heart was, when you're so happy, or when you're feeling such a strong emotion, your heart just feels like it's being squeezed almost. I can't describe it properly. I can't describe it with words. And that's one of the qualities of mystical experiences or awakening experiences, is this sense of ineffability. There are just words to describe it, because these experiences fall outside of the brackets of our usual way of experiencing life. So we don't have a language through which to describe it. And even if we did, it kind of doesn't even make sense for me to explain it, because it just occurred on a totally different level of human consciousness. But anyway, I felt this, pressure almost, or this squeezing in my heart space, in my third eye, and in the crown of my head. And I experienced this tingling in my third eye that I'd never felt before. Which, it was then fascinating to later down the line read up about all these kind of great mystics around the world who described similar tinglings and light emanations from these parts of the body. But just going back to my own experience, things like the colors around me were enhanced, sounds were enhanced, touch, like my five senses were on another level of experiencing. But the thing that was the most interesting about this experience, which lasted for many, many months, and again, it's still with me right now because my life changed completely from that moment onwards, is that it wasn't an experience that I had acquired. It was an experience that was already all around me, like that this sense of oneness, this connection with everything, this sense of consciousness being primary in the universe was already there, but that it was like a veil had been lifted from my eyes, and I could finally see what was already there the whole time, until my experience allowed me to see it. I speak in very symbolic terms. I really don't wish for anybody to interpret what I say in a literal sense, but there's no other way to describe it, basically. Yeah,
it's like people that have NDEs and stuff. There's how do you put it into words, and how do you transfer that information to somebody else, because it's so subjective, so personal.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating to retell the story. This isn't something I've ever told anyone on a podcast or in an interview, because I like giving interviews, and I make a point to talk about the experience for various reasons. But it is so frustrating, because no amount of language sophistication can get my message across. It's just something that you have to experience in order to understand.
Yeah. I'm sure you've heard this kind of comparison before. I think it was maybe Bruce Grayson that said it to me, that when one of his patients was trying to describe something to do with the NDE, or maybe it was multiple of them. But anyway, he kind of used a metaphor, a way of explaining what it's like, is he said that it's like trying to describe what colors are to a blind person, exactly. Or trying to describe what something smells like to somebody who's never had the ability to smell in their life. Like, how do you begin? Like, and obviously you've done a pretty good job. But you. I imagine there's loads that you have in there that internalized that you just can't share. You can't get out. Totally. So I can see the frustration.
The way I describe it is you're operating from a different mind gear. Like, when you're shifting gears in a car, I don't know, but that's something that came to me. It's like you're not operating on the same wavelength as many people. Yet I believe that everyone has this innate capability of accessing these states. But, I don't place myself any higher than anybody else. No way. But unless you've experienced it, you can't understand it, basically.
Yeah. And so the night before, you were an atheist, and then this happened and obviously changed your life. And I'll ask you in a second about how it changed your life. But before I do, just a couple of kind of more practical, less kind of spiritual questions about it. So your eyes were open or closed, like when you're kind of having this experience, or do you not really remember that detail? I guess they were open. You said you're seeing colors and everything in vivid detail.
Yeah.
And do you know how long it lasted at all? I guess, again, it's not something you check a clock for, but was it, I suppose you at least know it's less than an hour or something like that? Or
I think the experience lasted, well, that peak of the experience, that altered state lasted for months. I mean, it lasted for months.
Really?
The first 2 weeks were the most intense. Wow. And then it sort of started to wane, and then it started to wane, and then it continued to wane. But it just shifted everything for me. It shifted my way of perceiving life. It shifted my interaction with people. It shifted, and the altered state gradually began to integrate into the fabric of my everyday existence.
Wow.
But the experience stayed with me. It's still with me right now. I mean, and the way I describe it is that whereas before I was operating, on an up and down level like everybody else, from this level, now I'm up and down still, but from a higher level or a different level. So I'm operating from a different state of consciousness than before the experience.
Wow.
But in terms of the sort of, the initial peak experience, I would say 2 weeks and then waned to 6 months, and then it's
that's amazing.
That's
amazing. I was kind of half expecting you to say like the real peak experience was like 5 minutes maybe, or it was weeks. That's unbelievable. So you're kind of walking around with this love and blissful feeling kind of permeating through you, and everything just kind of like a Disney movie almost, but like in real life, like looking at everything, and it's like like got that glittery, sparkly. That's just wow, amazing.
It's something, it's a rebirth basically. And thinking about it now, I've told this story so many times that when I'm sitting with the experience, if I'm meditating or I'm just, and my body's recalling, it's feeling certain elements of that initial, that first experience.
Yeah.
Then I feel the emotion, but right now I'm feeling the emotion again, even if I'm just retelling it in symbolic terms. But I was walking around and there was this sense of magic everywhere. But what was fascinating so not only was there a sense of magic, and it was a sense of magic that I was like, oh my God, this was already always here. This was always here for me to discover. But I was like so caught up in my own world that I couldn't see what was truly there. But also funny things started happening, like synchronicities. I'd never really, of course I'd experienced coincidences and various synchronicities before, never giving them much importance. But after that experience, like things just came together. It was like I was attracting things, like there was an abundance around me. And I can't explain what that was, but opportunities started happening to me. People started happening to me. Like, I made some incredible connections, some incredible experiences occurred as a consequence of that awakening. And it almost felt like I was drawing them to me, and I know that may sound delusional to whoever's listening, but and who knows what what the reasoning behind that is. I'm all open to science. I'm quite a pragmatic thinker, quite a critical thinker, and yet I really couldn't describe to you. I couldn't explain to you why I was having these profound synchronous experiences, which were quite frightening at times. It's like, wow, what's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you have any other kind of experiences after? Like, I know people that have NDEs and other maybe similar experiences to what you've described. They kind of maybe notice precognitive things and different stuff like that, like maybe kind of psi elements being more active in their life, and I mean, probably other things too, but did you notice any of that stuff? Has any of that happened to you afterwards?
No, but I suddenly knew how to meditate.
Yeah.
So I know that's not paranormal or anything like that, but it was really cool because I suddenly could sit down and just get in that state immediately, but I still can, pretty easily.
Is it because you were just recalled to that sensation and the kind of the feelings you had and the emotions you had during that peak time as you described it, or was it something else?
Not when I meditate, no, because I kind of want to move past the sort of like constantly connecting with the past. Obviously, one of the things that this experience teaches you is to live in the present. But of course, I do recall the experience a lot. But no, even just meditating and being in the present, I just seem to be able to fall into that that empty space really, really easily.
Wow.
In terms of more psi-ish experiences, no, like I said, synchronicities.
Yeah.
But lots experiences of abundance, which I think comes with synchronicities. But not really precognitive experiences or telepathic experiences or anything like that. I've had a variety of different spiritual experiences since the awakening. Like experiencing myself whilst meditating in a white cloud, like visualize, like being able to see that whiteness all around me, things like that. So experiencing things that are not necessarily shared experiences with other individuals, but no, not really paranormal type experiences. Although after this talk, I'm probably going to think, oh my God, why didn't I mention that I had this and this and this? But, 6
you'll
years.
have to let me know.
I could forget.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, maybe, there's still time, isn't there? Of course, like you might be going to have an experience later today.
Exactly.
It's going to be precognitive or something. But yeah, wow. It's just amazing. Like I say, I didn't realize... I've kind of heard you talk a little bit about it before, but I didn't realize, I don't know why, maybe that didn't click to me, but I didn't realize it lasted so long. It's just phenomenal, really amazing. Is there anything else you wanted to kind of say about that experience or about kind of how it changed you or anything like that before we kind of slightly move on? I'm sure we're going to reference back to this in a few ways, maybe as we go on, but anything else you wanted to say? It doesn't have to be.
I could speak for an eternity on this subject. I'm actually obsessed with it. So
yeah.
I mean, it changed me. It made me become a lot more empathetic, a lot more able to understand people and the, why they probably think the way they do or behave the way they do. So I became a lot more forgiving, also towards myself. A lot more interested in wanting to be a better human, act of service towards people. I had a deep sense of mission that I needed to do something with what I'd experienced. And many other things.
I bet. Like you say, could talk about it forever. And I could probably keep coming up with things to ask you about it forever, but maybe we'll come back to it, like I say. But I suppose for now, let's kind of try and move on a little bit in the interest of time. So tell me about these groups that you run, these support groups for people going through spiritually transformative experiences. Like that's people going through experiences or having experiences akin to the one we've just talked about. And others that are maybe NDEs and stuff, people that have been through things like that too, or out-of-body experiences, and I'm sure many other things as well. But talk to me a little bit about that. Did you set that up, or was that already running when did you join that project? And
No, it was sort of a joint effort with the Psychedelic Society. So one of the sort of leaders of the Psychedelic Society, Amir, who's a great guy, he got in touch with me after I gave a talk with them on my research, and he asked me if I wanted to run these peer support groups. They hadn't been set up yet, so this is something that we co-organized, co-created. But it was really cool because that was something that had been on my mind for years, that I wanted to start running these kinds of events for people who'd have variety of spiritually transformative experiences to come together in order to discuss their experiences in a non-judgmental sort of setting, in a safe setting. So I was asked by the Psychedelic Society to run them, and I've been running them for a year now, and it's always sold out. It's crazy how it sells out every time really early on. Like as soon as I put the thing online, it just seems like many people have these kinds of experiences. Maybe not full-blown spiritual awakening experiences necessarily, but spiritual experiences of varying sorts, which also deserve to be addressed and talked about, and deserve the respect from the general public. And so I run them once a month at the moment, and I'm starting to run them online with Spiritual Awakenings International, although that's been ongoing for years. So they've just brought me in as a facilitator.
Cool. And how many people are normally at these meetings?
I keep them relatively small. I get 25 people, plus myself and Danny, who helps me out, just because we want to assure, that the safe space is respected. And if there are too many people, it's just impossible to moderate. It's 25 people, and it's always such a wonderful experience, I think. Well, at least for myself, and from what I hear from the people who've come. So do join if you're listening and you want to find a community around these experiences.
Yeah, I'll put the links in the description so people can find that. So then people kind of you go around in a circle and people stand up and share their experience. Is that how it works? Or
it's almost like an Alcoholics Anonymous. I remember we were going in a circle once, and this one guy picked up the talking stick that we use, and he said something like, "My name's na, and I'm not an alcoholic." Just because it was so likened to that kind of space. We usually, have an initial check-in all together, all 25 or 27 of us, with a talking stick. We use this sort of this prop that helps us just take the lead. So whoever's holding the stick can talk, and whoever isn't holding the stick needs to practice active listening, proactive listening. So it really encourages this space of, real listening. It's a real container for profound stories to be told and to be heard, more than anything. We do an initial check-in, and then I divide the groups into two, and then Danny takes one group, I take another subgroup, and then we do our own individual sharings, and they're sort of following the same thing of using the talking stick to speak and to listen, but it's a little bit more sort of less arranged, and then at the end we all come together and we do a checkout, and we all go to the pub after that for a more informal discussion. So I think people really appreciate that as well. Just getting together informally. But
And in terms of, I bet you must see loads of like similarities with the people, like in terms of maybe personality traits or ways that these experiences have affected them. And what kind of, is everybody from, I know they're not going to be, but what kind of backgrounds are they from? Is it a total array? Is it some people are religious, some people are atheists, some people are agnostic, well, maybe not atheist anymore, but is there that kind of full array of cultures and beliefs and, personalities?
I wouldn't be able to tell you the exact statistical breakdown, but there is usually a mix. It's usually a mixed bag. People of varying sort of backgrounds and religious backgrounds as well, and cultural backgrounds. Bearing in mind we hold these sessions in London, so there is a sort of demographic that comes with that. But generally speaking, people of people who are there are people who are Hindu, others who are Buddhist, others who are still consider themselves atheist, others who are agnostic, Catholics, whatever. We welcome everybody. What we tend to see though in these experiences is that people tend to move away from a sense of religiosity. I thought that was a really interesting thing that we found in our research project. But also just generally speaking to people, we find out that people tend to move away from religiosity and materialism. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, so they become kind of just more maybe spiritual agnostic, those kind of things, more open-minded and just in awe of the wonderment of everything.
Exactly. It tends to open your mind to the possibility that, yes, I mean, there might be a God or whatever, but it may not be your God. It may just be that there is this pervading energy or consciousness that permeates the universe, and that does not come with a name or with a figure or with a likeness. Yeah. Although I must say that during the interviews that I conducted for my research, I spoke to a couple of people, particularly from the US, actually, notably from the US, who for whom the experience enhanced their Christianity, their attachment to Christianity, which was also a very interesting take. I found that very valuable as well. It's always good to get different perspectives as well when we can.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Like in some NDEs, people say they see Jesus or heaven and things like that, don't they? But then you have the other side where people from different religions see their own God. I guess there's a part of expectation that goes into it. It's not to say the whole experience is based on that, but maybe there's a little element of that goes in, and it's just maybe our perception. Like we see that kind of a presence that we're like, wow, this is so powerful, or just, I don't even know, like a being, or just energy or light or however, or love, whatever it is. And then people kind of come back and they ascribe it to what they know, right? What they know in their culture or their belief or their religion. And it kind of takes on that. So yeah, I can see how it would strengthen, but yeah, it's fascinating. So Jessica, what are your main areas of research interest? I know I think you're very much in on altered states of consciousness, right, and spiritual awakenings. But tell me, what are your others, or what are your main areas of interest?
Well, I'm interested, as you've already mentioned, in all things, spirituality, non-duality, cosmic consciousness. But also, spiritual experiences or altered states emerging from contemplative practices like yoga, meditation, mindfulness. I'm also very interested in psychedelics, although I don't study them myself, but, I am very au courant. I'm very
up to date,
in the know of what's going on. I mean, I think if you study mystical experiences, you need to know what's going on in the psychedelic science realm as well, and how that's sort of enabling us to understand the brain better. So yes, I like to approach all of these topics from a neuroscientific, psychological perspective. That's not to say that, I mean, the greatest fascination is the philosophy of these experiences and what they actually bring about, but I'm also really interested in understanding the brain better. And that comes with things like neuroscience and neuroimaging.
I was just going to ask you about that. Like, have you been involved with some neuroimaging studies or anything like that? Or
no, not yet.
Not yet. But are you hoping to be soon?
Yeah, that's something it's brewing in my mind.
Yeah, because I think that stuff's fascinating. Like, obviously looking at what's going on in the brain when you're in an altered state of consciousness, and there are lots of different altered states of consciousness. It'd be interesting to compare individually, like what's the difference when somebody's maybe under the influence of psychedelics, or when they're meditating in a very deep meditative state, or when they, are having a lucid dream, or, there's so many different things that'd be fascinating to compare and contrast.
I would say, though, we need to be really careful with things like, talking about neuroimaging for the discovery of the inner workings of the mind with regards to these experiences, because
definitely
these technologies are not refined enough yet. I mean, yes, we can see sort of changes in blood flow and so on and so forth, and that is something that is already happening. We're already, researchers are already looking at these experiences through the lens of neuroimaging, rightfully. And they're receiving some very promising results, but it's very hard still to kind of pinpoint the changes that do occur in the brain, as we're still at the beginning of the road of all of this. And also, my main area of interest are spontaneous awakening experiences. And it is very difficult to induce a spiritual awakening. So that might be an issue as well. I'm sure there's a way that we can sort of better understand the inner workings of the brain through the lens of neuroimaging at some point, using some sort of methodology, despite people not being able to induce them directly.
Have you got any idea over like the population, like what kind of percentage of people might have a spontaneous spiritual awakening? Like, have you ever, has there been any study on that, like sending out a questionnaire to everybody at the university and saying, have you ever had an experience like this, and then getting a percentage? No?
There was a study done. I mean, it was just a survey. You know how we receive our, however many years we've received like a survey to complete for the government or whatever, a census.
Census, yeah.
There was a sort of census survey study thing in 2002 in the US, and they sent out it wasn't a census because it didn't involve the whole US population, but they asked amongst all of these other questions on whatever, mental health, finance, whatever, they also asked a question regarding spiritual experiences, and I think they asked something like, have you ever had an experience that transformed your life and that you would call and that was spiritual and that transformed your life, or something like that. I can't remember it off the top of my head, sorry, and I think about 47% of all of those who responded said yes.
47%, wow.
Yeah. So that's not necessarily a spiritual awakening or a spontaneous awakening. It could just be like a psi experience of some sort, or an experience of telepathy or synchronous experience. We don't really understand, we don't know the breakdown. It's still quite telling that quite a few people in the world have interesting non-ordinary experiences, which could perhaps be retermed more ordinary experiences, because we're starting to understand that these experiences are probably more frequent than we think.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm currently conducting a study with the EPRC, the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium, led by Daniel Ingram, and we sent out a survey we've got responses from 3,500 individuals who are not necessarily spiritual. So this is just, the survey was sent out to the general public.
Yeah.
And a high percentage of those came back saying that they'd had one experience or another of the spiritual type, or of the mystical, or of an energetic type that they couldn't explain through science. So
wow.
I'm not going to go into the specifics or the statistics of it yet, because it's in the process of being written up as a paper that we're going to publish.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very interesting to see how many people have these kinds
At first glance, it's notable, the percentage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know when you expect that paper to be published?
Not sure yet. We're hoping to submit it in the next, 3 or 4 months or something like that. So
cool.
It'll probably be published next year.
Yeah. Yeah, no worries. Talk to me a little bit about Kundalini Yoga, because you're a teacher. Is that what a teacher, Kundalini Yoga teacher?
Yeah.
Or a guide, but yeah, a teacher. So again, like what is Kundalini? What makes Kundalini Yoga this? What defines it? The specific type of yoga. What are the benefits? Why should people do it? How do you do it? Just tell me a little bit about it in general.
Yeah. Kundalini Yoga basically has its roots in Tantra and in yoga, the Patanjali's sutras, from which all yoga comes from. But it's sort of a synthesis of Tantra, the Tantric lineage and the yogic lineage. And we use sort of different breathwork patterns, different meditations, including chants, and recitations, and we also use prayer, yogic postures and asanas. We give great importance to mudras and hand postures, and to drishti, so eye movements as well, to create a sort of a synthesis of all of this is what makes Kundalini Yoga, as opposed.
What do you mean about the eye movements? Like you look in a certain direction, or like?
Yeah. So usually, if you've got a Kundalini Yoga teacher, you'll get instructions on where to look, on where to direct your eye gaze. So it might be behind closed eyes, but your teacher might ask you to put your focus on the third eye, or on the tip of your nose, or on the chin, or to your heart. Or for instance, we'll have movements where we're doing like breath work combined with eye movement, combined with movement. And it'll be a case of like, looking to the left and looking to the right as you're breathing, as you're inhaling to the left and exhaling to the right, for example. I'm just giving you an example.
Yeah.
There are over 8,000 different yoga kriyas in Kundalini Yoga, so different yoga recipes, so to speak. But yeah, it's really interesting actually. And I don't know enough about EMDR therapy, but I've taught many people who've then come to me saying that, whoa, like the session was extremely powerful and it reminded me of my EMDR session. So it's
what does that stand for? Sorry, EMDR?
Eye movement desensitization something. I'll tell you again in a minute.
I'll put it up on the screen or something.
I've lost it. But yes, it's using eye movement in order to sort of retune the brain to perceive stimuli as no longer a threat, for example. So it's a technique that is often used now in psychotherapy to heal people with trauma, with PTSD. And a lot of the Kundalini Yoga kriyas that we do involve a lot of these like rapid eye movements and left and right body movements done sort of in a similar way to EMDR. So it's very interesting how it's almost like mainstream clinical settings are catching up with what had been taught for many centuries, other traditions. But it's great that we're getting the science to back it up now as well. So yeah. Wow. But Kundalini Yoga basically is a very rapid way of attaining an altered state of consciousness. So it's something that people need to be slightly aware of when they start it. There needs to be consent around and knowledge around what people are getting themselves into. That's not to say it's a bad experience. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever practiced, and that's why I became a Kundalini Yoga teacher. But it's a very powerful practice. And it can sometimes result in strange physical sensations or strange mental and perceptual changes. So it's just something that people need to be aware of. But usually that leads people to the unleashing of human potential and of energy, and that can be a very beautiful thing.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds amazing. So when did you first try it?
I actually practiced it. I did a few classes years before my spiritual experience, my spiritual awakening. But then after my spiritual awakening, a year later, I decided that I wanted to do yoga again, to practice yoga again. As my experience was starting to sort of integrate, and I wasn't feeling that sort of high or buzz anymore, and I was fine with that, but I was thinking, okay, I'm going to find another practice to sort of sustain me in that state, because you need to sort of practice retaining that state and staying in that state. And so right next door there was a yoga studio, and it happened to be a Kundalini yoga studio. I just fell in love with it, and I fell in love with it in a very different way than I had enjoyed it before my experience, because I understood what it was all about. And we also had like post yoga philosophy discussions. Cool. And that was also a really great way to integrate the experience and make sense of it. So yeah.
Amazing. And is it possible for people to do that like at home? Could you put on like a YouTube video, like Kundalini Yoga, like guide or something? Would that work? Is that going to be nowhere near? Like, what do you think about that? Is that possible? Is it worthwhile?
It's possible, but what I would say with Kundalini Yoga is that it's always good to have a guide with you, whether that's online or in person. Obviously, it's always better to do yoga practice in person because things are more sort of direct. But even if it's online, I would recommend having a guide or a teacher, because it's just good to stick to certain specifics of the yoga. For instance, timings are very specific. So the amount of time in which you do something like breath of fire shouldn't exceed a certain amount of time. There are certain ways of moving your tongue and your mouth when you do chanted meditations that, maybe are not so obvious on an online YouTube vid.
Yeah.
And like I said, because this type of yoga is very quick to unleash energy in the body, it is always favorable to have somebody there with you in those moments. It's calm you to just say, hey, that's
calm you down when you're freaking
just done
out.
breath of fire for 3 minutes and then you've retained your breath. So you're okay, everything's fine, all good. But it's always good to have that reassurance and that guidance. I would suggest doing it with a guide. And what I really enjoy is also, personally, I love doing yoga classes with a group, because I think the energy really ramps up in a group. You hear everybody's breathing, you hear everybody's chanting, and it just becomes this whole other practice. Wow. I think there's beauty in doing your own solo practice, but also in being in a group.
Yeah, that's amazing. I have so many questions I want to ask you about it. So how long normally is a session? Is there like a set amount of time? Like how long are your sessions when you teach?
My sessions are usually 1 hour and a half.
Okay, I had that in my mind for some reason. I have no idea why. Okay, it's quite long for like.
Yeah, they're never under 1 hour and 15.
Oh, cool.
It shouldn't be under 1 hour and 15 because there is the set sort of routine. So you normally, you open up with your chants, and then you usually do some warm-ups, and then you go into the yoga kriya, which works on a specific element of the mind, body, and soul. And then after that, you do a long rest, shavasana, resting sort of integration moment, a relaxation part of the yoga. And then you go into your meditation. And I would say that a lot of yoga teachers generally reduce the amount of time for the relaxation and for the meditation. And this is not good, in my opinion, because your body needs to integrate. And I use this word a lot, and I'm aware that I'm overusing it, but it's essential for people's well-beings, particularly when they're delving into spiritual practice, to let the body understand what it's just gone through, let the subconscious mind absorb what's just happened, and let things just flow through you and flow over. Otherwise, you're in this constant state of alert. Oh, I've just practiced this yoga, and now I'm going to go on to do my everyday activities. And there needs to be a sort of break and a moment for your brain and body to relax and to experience what it's just gone through.
Yeah.
And also, meditation is super important. And when you go to yoga studios anywhere now, you've got this sort of very rushed routine. And I feel very sorry for yoga teachers because they have to stick to that sort of 1 hour slot, which ends up being more like 50 minutes. You've got to do the setup and the takedown. And everything is so rushed, and it just loses its element. Yoga is meant to be something that we soak up and we melt into, not something that we should rush just to tick off, our box of things, our list of things to do.
Yeah.
I think we're following the similar mentality that we're trying to avoid, adhering to this sort of new way of just banging one after the other yoga sessions.
Yeah.
We're losing a lot of the elements of yoga.
Yeah, the London way of life, like rushing from your job to the tube, from the tube to the yoga session, and then straight home.
Yeah.
Do you teach online as well as in person, or is it just in person that you do?
I've been running them in person, but then I moved to Spain, and now I'm back in London. I think I'll probably start running them on a one-to-one basis.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so either online or in person. So I'm open for that. And group sessions I'm also open to, but it's not my main area of focus right now, but I'm feeling really called to share the teachings on a one-to-one basis and to have a student that I can sort of, kind of work with more integrally and more holistically.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds amazing. If and when you get like a website or something set up for that, like let me know and I can kind of put the link in this description and things like that. I also have to ask you the breath of fire thing. You kept mentioning breath of fire like as this specific part of the session. So what is that? Can you tell me what that is exactly? Like you mentioned like a 3-minute breath of fire. It sounds intense, so I have to know.
It's a powerful breathing method that's usually done from the diaphragm, from the abdomen. So you're pumping the navel in and out towards the spine and keeping your mouth closed and breathing in and out from your nostrils. So it looks like this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This is very quick.
Exactly. I mean, you can start off at 1 breath per second, but eventually you want to sort of make that a little faster. And it generates a lot of heat in the abdomen. So it's very good for things like, metabolism and other digestive sort of things. But it's in Kundalini Yoga, we use it a lot to generate the energy at the 3rd chakra or the solar plexus, to then pull a bandha, what we call a bandha, which is like a body lock in the body, to then direct the energy up the spine and towards the brain or the crown of the head. And again, these are symbols. I'm using symbols to describe something that we still don't really know very much about from a scientific perspective, but it's definitely something. Something definitely happens when you do that kind of breathing and then pull different locks in the body, and it can lead to sensations of ecstasy. And in yogic traditions, they say that it's the movement of libido energy in the body. But again, we haven't been able to sort of measure that in a more scientific way. It would be a very interesting project.
Yeah, definitely. It's fascinating. And so that's like one of the examples of the kind of breath work that goes into it. And then a session of an hour and a half will be loads of different types of breath work like that, or different to that, but along the same lines. And then there'll be your eyes and everything else going on at the same time.
Yeah, everything at the same time, pretty much. And also mentally repeating mantras. And all of this is just a way of getting outside of your usual state of thinking. So, I don't know if you've ever tried chanting meditation. I find it extremely powerful because you focus on the tonality of your voice, you focus on the words that you're saying out loud, and it's almost like you're directing your entire being in that moment to the mantra. And that in itself gets you outside of your thinking mode and into an experiential mode.
Wow.
And actually, I think things like chanting and other forms of meditation and breath work can lower things like the default mode network, which is a set of sort of parts of the brain. Again, I'm using very simplistic wording to describe something much more complex. But it lowers our sense of lowers the activity that is associated with our direct sense of self or our egoic self. So it would make sense that we then become less self-conscious during a breath work or a chanting session.
Yeah, definitely. Have you ever had anybody like have any issues during a session, like any kind of health issues, or just have like a kind of freak out, like a panic attack, like bugging out a bit?
No, actually, it's all been really smooth, and I think that's why you need to be with an experienced teacher who knows something about spirituality as well and spiritual experiences, because there are a ton of incredible teachers out there, but if you've not had a direct experience of an altered state, then how can you possibly understand when to how to notice that someone's about to have a negative experience, or when it's time to stop and when it's time to moderate the practice. I think once you know a little bit more about the inner workings of these kinds of experiences, and you're able to moderate your practice to suit the individuals in your class, and to know the triggers and to just be more aware of what could go wrong, what could go really well as well. So luckily, I've not had any issues in my classroom, but I also stick to the time limits. I stick to the to the limits of the classroom, and I don't go beyond that. I don't exceed that. And in my opinion, it's better to go slow. Slow and steady wins the race, rather than try and just go all in immediately, and then that might cause someone to just have a panic experience because they're like, whoa, what are these feelings? I don't like what I'm feeling. When actually they're perfectly natural sensations. They're just we need to rewire the brain to experience those feelings in a more positive light.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, well, you've sold it well. I'm very intrigued to try it. Actually, it sounds amazing. Tell me just kind of in a nutshell, maybe just like 2 minutes or something, any tips for people that want to do meditation? I know meditation very different, very kind of about being still and just mindful right in the moment. But if you just got any tips for anybody like me that maybe struggles a little bit with that wants to do more of it, just kind of how people can do it at home and get into that right headspace and things like that.
My main tip is keep trying, keep practicing, because you're working the brain muscle. I mean, if you go to the gym and you want to work out your arms, you want to build or you want to build better posture, you want to build like a better whatever it is you're trying to achieve at the gym, then you'd have to go to the gym many times in order to achieve that. You can't expect it to happen overnight, and that's really the same thing with our perception and with our experience, inner experiences of the mind. And things like meditation need to be practiced, and the more you practice meditation, the easier it will become to fall into that state of consciousness. But I would also say that with meditation, I mean, we're all different, and different types of meditation will suit different types of people. You don't need to sit still for meditation. You can also, and the goal really, if there is a goal, is to be able to practice meditation or mindfulness in your everyday way of existing. So, for example, the way you eat your food, or the way you walk. And, I think a really special way of meditating is just to go out in the woods or in a green space and just bring your attention to what is around you, and also to what you're experiencing in that moment. Just pay attention, with full attention, to the colors of the leaves around you, or to the sensation of the gravitational pull of your body, or the way your feet feel against the ground, or the smells around you. And that's a really, really good way of getting into that state. And there are lots of different techniques, and everybody needs to find their own way of practicing. But like I said, I think the most important thing to take away from this is just to keep practicing, and you will get there eventually. You can rewire the brain to do whatever you want it to do, really.
Just got to keep trying, to keep practicing, keep at it. It's solid advice, really. Simple, but it's very, very important. I'll keep trying. So let's kind of change it up a little bit here. I don't want to keep you too long. Okay, so what are your thoughts on Psi Phenomena?
I think unless you've had an experience, you can't possibly know that it is, that it exists. But
Whether it's real.
Believe that people's subjective experiences are important enough for you to believe them. I mean, in other words, I do believe that these, Psi phenomena are a thing, because I've spoken to an innumerable amount of people who have had different types of Psi phenomena or paranormal experiences. And so I don't think it's something we should ever discredit. I don't think we should ever discredit people's individual experiences. And I think with the increase in research around phenomenology, or the research of first-person experiences, is just going to get us really far, I think, in science. And I look forward to see where that takes us, because I think Psi phenomena and other related phenomena are extremely important to investigate. and they might give us more of an inkling at the nature of consciousness and of reality.
Yeah, definitely. Have you, I guess you haven't, but have you ever seen anything like firsthand? Have you ever like witnessed somebody, communicate telepathically with somebody else, or witness somebody remote view something, or bend a spoon or whatever? Have you ever seen anything, not yourself doing it, but necessarily, but have you ever kind of been around anything like that?
No, not around. I haven't been around, somebody who's performed a sort of experiment around those kinds of experiences. But like I said, I've spoken to many people who have had these experiences of precognition, of telepathy, but also people who have experienced direct contact with entities. So I've spoken to a couple of people who experienced, during their spontaneous awakening experience, actually, blue beings around them, which I thought was fascinating, because when I had my experience, I didn't experience anything of the sort.
Yeah.
And again, it's just so valuable to get these kinds of, bite-sized, these feedbacks of what other people have experienced.
Yeah, definitely. Do you remember what they said about the blue beings? And was it just one person, or have you heard that from multiple people?
I've heard it from two people now.
Independently.
But the person that really stands out was someone that I interviewed for my own research project. This woman who, bless her, I had such a good conversation with her, and she told me that she had never been spiritual before. She was not spiritual. She was not religious or anything like that. She worked in a casino.
Yeah.
She still does. And one day she was at home, and she was on YouTube just looking at random videos, and then this video by Eckhart Tolle, or Eckhart Tolle, I can never pronounce his surname, popped up on her feed, and she clicked on it and she was watching it. All of a sudden she had this incredible experience of, what I described earlier, this feeling of oneness, of ultimate love that she'd never experienced before, of bliss. Mm-hmm. And she stood up and she walked to the other side of her room, and she was in shock, in awe. And in that moment, she experienced something that we would call autoscopy, or seeing oneself from outside one's body. Mm-hmm. So she saw herself.
Like an out-of-body experience, basically.
Like an out-of-body experience. But what was really fascinating was the fact that she was seeing herself, but she was also experiencing these blue beings lying over her, around her, in like a semicircle, mm-hmm. looking down on her as if to sort of say, oh God, she's come too far, or something like that. They were sort of perplexed. This is what she couldn't see their expressions, but she had this feeling that they were perplexed confused to see her.
Yeah.
And then she got propelled back into her body, and and this experience transformed her. But again, what really stuck with her was that experience of oneness and interconnection. So that was super fascinating.
It sounds
I follow groups on Facebook of people who've had near-death experiences and people who've had spiritual awakening experiences, and you see loads of similar themes come up, also from the more visual kind of perspective. And I know that in DMT experiences as well, people perceive things like machine elves, but I've also read about people experiencing these kinds of blue beings. So, I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
It's not that. Sorry.
No, you go.
The more I learn about these experiences, the more open my mind becomes, because I'm like, I literally don't know anything. I thought I knew everything. Now I don't know anything. They're very humbling to listen to, these experiences.
Definitely. The more you learn, the more questions you have. That seems to be the way of it, right? The more we learn, the more we find out, the more we want to know, and the more questions present themselves. I guess she didn't like try and categorize these blue beings in any way, like they're human, or people that are deceased, or alien, or any kind of. She just kind of, they were what they were, and they
were what they were, I think.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing though.
They didn't have a framework at the time, so that's also something to consider. She didn't have a framework through which to interpret the experience, so I suppose your mind is probably more open to the vaster interpretations of what they could be in that.
Yeah, there's probably so many ways we could try and interpret it in, like, you know, from a speculative point of view, we could try and do so many, like, oh, it could be this or anyway, the night before you had your spiritual awakening, you mentioned you had a lucid dream. Yeah. So I just wanted to ask you briefly again about dreams, the dream state, lucid dreaming. Do you think there's, again, you don't have to know exactly what the connections and crossovers are, but do you think there are connections and crossovers with all this stuff we've been talking about today, with consciousness and these kind of more spiritual topics? Do you think through dreams or through lucid dreams, we're able to kind of communicate with our own, I don't know, again, different ways of putting this, but like our own higher self or our own kind of higher level consciousness? Just what are your thoughts, really? Just talk for a couple of minutes about all that, wherever you want to go with it.
I think the dream state can be a gateway to understanding ourselves better and our own conscious mind. And I think I know they can be conducive to awakening experiences, because I had mine. That was preempted from this very powerful lucid dream that I had. And whilst I tend not to discuss the dream in so much detail, I just sort of normally just mention it. I don't go into it fully, but I think it definitely played a part in what happened in my brain at the time of my waking up.
Mm-hmm.
So
Do you not go into it because it's personal, or just because, is there any other reason?
I don't come into it because I try and describe my experience in the best possible way that I can through language. But then if I start to bring in another experience, the two can get confused and conflated, and people often then think that my awakening experience was a lucid dream, or
that kind of spillover.
Yeah, or that when I woke up, I was thinking about my lucid dream. And so, theoretically, I knew that we were one, because that was the theme of my lucid dream, was all about, you know, what is the meaning of life? So I tend not to express that purely for the fact that I don't want to confuse people. It is, in my mind, a separate event that I think was very much, occurred very much in conjunction with the awakening, but I don't think it was the awakening itself. Probably something in my brain was happening at that moment, which allowed me to have that very profound lucid dream, and thus also allowed me to have the awakening experience, if we're going to look at it through a neurobiological perspective, or a neurochemical perspective.
Yeah.
Maybe endogenous DMT, who knows?
Maybe. Did you kind of go into that lucid dream intentionally, or was it just a spontaneous lucid dream? Like, are you a lucid dreamer in general? Like, can you lucid dream at will, or is it something that happens to you on the off chance here and there? Like, because again, I'd love to be able to lucid dream more often. I think I had one lucid dream. It was a few days or weeks after I spoke to Robert Wagner, who's like, he's written a few books on lucid dreaming, and he's like a well-known kind of lucid dream person. But it was, I've had one kind of semi-lucid dream. But so what was that for you? Was it planned? Was it?
No, it wasn't planned at all. It was totally spontaneous. But I have always been able to lucid dream. I mean, sometimes it's easier than others. I'm not going to lie to you and say that I can lucid dream at will anytime I want. It usually occurs when I'm really, really, really tired. I suppose because the brain is propelled into a state of REM sleep immediately, I think. I mean, I actually am not too sure what happened. But so I've always been able to lucid dream, and I've always had very, very cosmic dreams. This is something that really connect me with the spirit world, spirit realm, or higher states of consciousness throughout my life, that I wasn't aware that was kind of similar to spirituality, but it's definitely an aspect of spirituality. The dream state is a very profound state, and it's something it's a state that we can learn a lot from. And it can possibly induce certain other states as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm fascinated by it. I need to try and learn more about it and understand more about it. I suppose you wouldn't necessarily have lucid dreaming tips for people because you've always been kind of naturally able to do it. But I'm thinking as well, like, in terms of the possibilities within the lucid dream. Like I spoke to Stanley Krippner, who no doubt you're aware of, who used to be a pioneer in the dream telepathy studies. I've heard of people being able to do kind of heal themselves via dreams, whether it be physical. Like physical seems wild. Emotional healing seems kind of fairly understandable in your dream, like healing yourself emotionally or mentally. But physical, I've heard people talk about that, and it seems way harder to comprehend. And yeah, there's other like ways of interacting with, like you say, this element of consciousness, or it's hard to put the words on it, but
yeah, of course. I think Charlie Morley also is I don't know if you've heard of him. He's an expert in lucid dreaming, and he's written a book. I haven't actually read it yet, but it's on my shelf, and it's on different techniques to lucid dream. So maybe that's something you might want to pick up. I don't know in how much depth it goes, but I mean, I watched him talk. I've watched his talk, and I thought it was really, really good. And he also describes experiences of healing trauma through lucid dreaming. For instance, if you bring yourself to a lucid dream and then you allow yourself to experience maybe the person who traumatized you, and have a conversation with them, that can be deeply healing. Or I think he was discussing, people like, war veterans who use lucid dreaming as a technique to get themselves back in that state, that terrifying state, and also be aware on the flip side that they were just in a dream and that everything was okay. And that sort of, in some ways, might rewire the brain to experience life differently. It all makes sense, in my opinion. It's just that we haven't got the exact reasonings behind why things like lucid dreaming can be so powerful. But it's so obviously powerful. I guess a part of it is that when we're asleep and we're in that state, we're obviously stripped away from all the modern day distractions and stimuli that kind of distract us from whatever is going on with consciousness or at higher levels in our own mind. So maybe that's something to do with it. And I was going to mention as well, I kind of forgot in my little ramble, but Robert Wagner, this guy I spoke to over a year ago now, I think, he mentioned that in some of his lucid dreams, he regularly meditates, like in his lucid dream, like he'll just go and sit down and meditate inside a lucid dream. And I just thought that was wild. And I think he had probably some very spiritual, very transformative experiences inside a lucid dream while meditating in a lucid dream. If you ever have time, you should try and find that episode that I did with him, because it was really fascinating. Back then, I was very I didn't realize the path it was going to take in the episode. I thought it was going to be just kind of like, tell me how I can lucid dream because it sounds cool. That was kind of before my kind of spiritual journey had really begun. Maybe that was planting some seeds in there as well, and that was kind of opening my mind a little bit. But yeah, I was totally not prepared for like precognitive dreams, which we discussed, and like potential dream healing. I was like, whoa, this is a lot. But looking back on it, it was fascinating. And like, I'm going to have to talk to him again at some point soon. It's wild what we can do with our, how we can alter our consciousness in very natural ways,
Yeah.
I have a technique, because you asked me earlier, but
cool.
I don't know if this is like, it's obviously proved by myself because I use it when I want to get into that lucid dream state, but Perfect. I don't know if it's something that is so widely used. But anyway, it sounds so simple, and I guess you need to just already find it quite easy to get into that state, but I'll try and describe it to the best of my ability. So when you're lying on your bed, or when I'm lying on my bed, and I want to have a lucid dream, I'll maintain a state of awareness on my bodily sensations, on the weight of my body on the bed. I try and bring as much consciousness to the sensation of lying down, of the fact I'm about to fall asleep. So I try and maintain that connection with my conscious state whilst allowing myself to fall asleep. So in other words, I'm falling asleep, but I'm also bringing my attention whilst that's happening to my body and my state of mind. And then when I feel that I'm about to fall asleep, I bring my eye gaze behind closed eyelids towards my third eye. And are you able to cross your eyes by any chance?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay, so the sensation you should be feeling, and this also goes back to the Kundalini Yoga eye gaze that I was talking about, is like you're crossing your eyes and then bringing that cross-eyedness, that lock, to the third eye. So it's almost as though you're trying to look out through a window in the third eye. So as you're falling asleep, you bring your attention to this point whilst crossing your eyes almost. And I often feel this vibration occurring in my, like it's overpowering. It takes over my entire body and mind. It feels like everything's vibrating.
Wow.
And then I feel like this pressure on my heart. And then I'm faced with different avenues. Like either I want to wake up because I'm frightened, or I'll go into a sort of sleep paralysis, which is not very fun. I don't know if you've ever experienced that.
I have, yeah.
It's not fun, but that can happen if you don't navigate it properly. Or the third option is just bring yourself to a lucid dream. I don't really know how to describe the transition, but it normally just occurs with me when I just have the intention that I want to go into a lucid dream. But you have to be fully committed, fully prepared, not afraid. I mean, nothing's going to happen to you in your lucid dream. It's all good. Just be aware of the fact that you're safe. You're in your bed. Everything's fine. Allow yourself to go there and know that you can always come out of it. And I find that something that brings me out of these states, like whether I'm in sleep paralysis or lucid dreaming, that I just want to come out of. You can either wait for it to be over and like finally release yourself from that state, or what I like to do is I like to bring my attention to a specific person. In these cases, it's always my brother, because he's an anchoring force in my life, and he's a very stable person, and very grounded. And I like to just think of him, because if I start thinking of all the people I love and who ground me, then it becomes too hectic in my mind. So I focus on my brother. So whoever's listening can focus on a specific person that brings you peace, and just keep bringing your attention to that person, visualize them, and eventually you can come out of that state. And that's particularly for negative sleep paralysis experiences or hypnagogic hallucination experiences, which are not fun.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm definitely going to try that, and I'll let you know how it goes. Hopefully it'll work. I guess I'll just mention my tip for not lucid dreaming, because I'm done it once, like I said, and it wasn't a full lucid dream. For sleep paralysis, just in case your tip doesn't work for anybody, because it's horrible. What I done when I haven't had it for a few years now, I don't think, but I have had it multiple occasions, and I would always focus on just moving, focus all of my mind on moving just the smallest part of my body. So just on the very tip of one of my fingers or something like that, and I'll just be kind of focused on that, and it won't be moving. And eventually, you'll just get this tiny movement, and then you have to seize your moment, and just move everything else. And then for me, that's how I managed to get out of my sleep paralysis multiple times. Just this tiny little oh, and as soon as it does that little twitch, you're like, oh, okay, move quick before I fall back into it. Because it's horrible. It's such a scare. The first time in sleep paralysis must be one of the scariest experiences.
100%. And
did you ever have it with sorry to interrupt you, please carry on in a second, but did you ever have it with a presence, some kind of presence there? You did?
Yeah, I think that's the case for most people. It's fascinating to me how we all experience very similar things, and tell me if yours was similar. But the first sleep paralysis experience I was in my home in Italy, my family home. And it's always pitch black there, because we have those shutters, those Mediterranean shutters.
We have the same here.
Yeah, we don't have in the UK, in London. And so pitch black, and I was just lying in bed and fell asleep. Was it that I was falling asleep? No, I was waking up. So I woke up from my dream, and then I couldn't move, and I couldn't move, and it was terrifying. And then I suddenly perceived this entity, like a ghost, entering my body through my mouth, so it was being sucked into my body, and it swirled around my body a few times. And then after a while, it was the most terrifying experience ever. And after a while, it felt like it just went out of my body again, my mouth. So yeah, I experienced this very malicious ghost type entity.
That's wild. Yeah.
But a lot of people report the same type of more malicious, negative entity, or alien entities even. And that seems to be very similar across different traditions as well. But tell me what yours was.
Yeah. Well, the most common thing I've heard is just because your one sounds crazy. I've heard that it's very common just to have this presence kind of there. And like, I don't think it necessarily normally interacts very much. It's just kind of there. That's what I've heard. It's just, there's this like this dark presence just maybe on the end of your bed or just like standing over you or something like that. And it's always terrified me. Thankfully, I've been blessed in that every time I've had sleep paralysis, I haven't had that kind of presence or that being or whatever it is, that entity feeling. It's just been the terror of like, I can't move. And like, you know, and again, the first couple of times of like not understanding why, and like, you know, you've just woken up and you're panic. But no, thankfully, touch wood, I haven't had the experience with that sensation of sharing it with something else, because terrifies me.
If you ever do, it won't be as terrifying because your subconscious will know that this is just something that happens, you know. That's that brings in the importance of sharing stories, you know, the importance of sharing experience. And I feel so strongly about. The more we talk about things, the more we recognize that we're not alone in having had certain experiences, and that they can be quite normal and quite average. Like most people, I think, in the world have sleep paralysis experiences. But probably, like, you know, decades ago, if you had told someone that you had had that experience, you'd be like, oh my God, you're possessed, or, you know, let's find her, she's a witch. So yeah, the importance of storytelling and of sharing, is essential.
Yeah, I agree, and thank you for sharing that and everything else that you've shared today. Let's move on to psychedelics, and again, just for a couple of minutes, just tell me again your thoughts on how maybe they connect or their value, or you know, kind of the work that you've seen done on them in terms of scientific research and stuff. Just kind of talk about that for a couple of minutes, if you don't mind.
No, I think psychedelic research is really paving the way for a better understanding of consciousness, generally speaking. You know, not just altered states, but actual, you know, the actual nature of reality. I think they're really good supporters of alternate ways of experiencing life. And what's really amazing about psychedelics is that they're, you know, I mean, although they're unfortunately illegal in most countries, and most psychedelics are illegal, but they are widely available. So more and more people are able to sort of experience different states of consciousness through psychedelics. And I think this can be deeply enriching if done in the appropriate setting, of course, and with the appropriate knowledge of what you're getting yourself into. But psychedelic research, is really just paving the way for our understanding of deeper ways of knowing. But what I find really fascinating is, I mean, besides the fact that, you know, psychedelics can be used to treat these disorders, but it's also the fact that they're starting to find out that it's actually the mystical element of these experiences that seem to be the most conducive to a long-term and more profound outcome in the treatment of things like treatment-resistant depression, anxiety, and so on. So that sort of makes a strong case also for the study of spiritual awakenings that occur endogenously, i.e. without the use of psychedelics.
Yeah, I think there's going to be so much fascinating stuff we're going to learn about psychedelics over the coming years, right? With like, they're starting to do more research on it in America. They're starting to allow it to be used to treat depression and stuff like that, I think now in some states. And it's going to be the elements of, treating, like you said, mental health disorders. And then it's going to be the spiritually transformative side of it. And they're just crazy as well. Like when you think of mushrooms in particular, I keep hearing this recently. It keeps being repeated to me in different places about how we, like, mushrooms share more in common with us, I think, than they do with most other plants. They're kind of like this like halfway house, which just seems wild, doesn't it? But it feels like that's a very telling. It feels like there must be way more there that we don't understand yet, and hopefully the possibilities maybe are endless.
Magic is all around us. And that's the fascinating thing about things like psychedelics, is that they can show us an objective reality that we perhaps were blinded to before.
So let's move on to consciousness. And so What do you think is the closest that we, humanity, has come to having maybe a workable theory of consciousness? I don't think anybody thinks we've cracked it. In fact, I think probably most people would agree that we haven't cracked it, and it's the hard problem, isn't it? Or at least one of the hard problems. But yeah, what are your thoughts? Again, just kind of ramble away with me here. Just think out loud and just tell me, yeah, what is it? How does it work as far as you understand or as far as you believe?
I mean, I will say this. I probably won't go into the theories of consciousness, but what I find so remarkable is this common feature of spiritual awakenings, which is that most people who have them, whether it's through NDE, spontaneous, through meditation, or whatever, through psychedelics, is the same thing, is that consciousness pervades the universe. Consciousness is primary. This is something that people come out of the experience with. It's a deep inner knowing. It's not even a theory, an acquired theory or a thought. It's a deep inner knowing that at the basis of everything is consciousness.
Fundamental.
Consciousness is fundamental, exactly, or primary. So I think there's, that's quite telling, I think. Maybe what the nature of reality actually is. And what's also fascinating is that these experiences often feel realer than real, realer than reality. So they should be taken into consideration and given,
Yeah. So you don't necessarily ascribe to like a theory that somebody's come up with at the moment. You, again, because we haven't cracked it. So you kind of stay away from those and just kind of look at it. You step back and look at the whole thing.
I like to look at things more just from an experiential perspective, from my own experience, also from subjective experiences of those around me. Just because I think lots of people get pigeonholed into specific like theories, and then they close their minds off
Definitely
to alternate theories often. I'm not anti-theory. I just my way of thinking is much more through experience and through listening.
More fluid,
than through just believing in something.
No, absolutely. And so you think it's fundamental? So you think animals have a consciousness? Do you think everything has a consciousness? Where'd you go with that? Where'd you stand on that?
Another thing is that consciousness is a word that we use to mean different things. Like, I am conscious right now because I'm thinking, I'm talking to you, I'm aware. Consciousness can be synonymous to awareness. But consciousness in the way that we're saying consciousness is primary is almost that we're referring to this like underlying, what I was describing earlier, intelligence or something, energy, chi, whatever you want to call it, that pervades everything. So it's in that sense, yes, that would imply that everything that exists within this universe is conscious. The walls around me, my desk in front of me, my computer screen, that's all part of consciousness because all is one, essentially. And consciousness is primary and is fundamental. And a really beautiful visualization of this is from something that I read. I think it was Alan Watts who said this, obviously in more poetic terms, but in a book on Taoism, I think, he describes, this sort of consciousness or this intelligence as what makes the leaves grow on trees and the plants blossom and the flowers blossom in the spring, and what makes the leaves fall off the trees in the autumn. It's like there is a cycle. Everything is in constant flux. It's in constant cycle. And whilst we can look at these things as science, from a scientific lens and box them up like, plants go through photosynthesis and then, whatever, they perceive that it's time of the year to shed the leaves and whatever. We can look at it through that lens, but what happens on the basis of all of that, what underlies all of those processes is what we mean by the fundamental consciousness.
It's a nice way of explaining it, actually. I haven't heard somebody kind of
put
it across just like that. But yeah, it's really good. Okay, so that's consciousness done. That's that massive topic done. What about the survival of it after our bodies, after our bodies on this earth, our human body dies, after our material body perishes, what happens to our soul, our consciousness, our mind, our essence, whatever people want to call it. I don't know how familiar you are with like the evidence and the research that's been done in this, because obviously there's not enough hours in the day to familiarize yourself with everything. But what are you aware of, and what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I am aware of, again, people's subjective experiences of, NDEs. Again, it's important to state that NDEs are not full death experiences, they're near death experiences. So we don't know what comes after that experience. But I think NDEs are really promising if we want to, live on as souls, that possibility.
Yeah.
But I don't know if and how we survive, our soul survives death, or if it does. All I know is that when I had my spiritual awakening experience, I knew intuitively to have returned to that space. And it led me to a great sense of loss of fear of death.
Yeah.
Because it was like homecoming, and it intuitively I knew that was where I would return to. That state was where I was going to return to.
Yeah.
So I suppose whilst I don't know, nobody knows what happens after death, but I don't know. I have a sense that everything's going to be okay, that everything will be well, all is well, and that we will return home. But that, again, that's just, from a personal experience that wasn't even induced through a near-death experience.
Yeah. You don't know, but you have a knowing, an internal knowing.
Exactly. An inner knowing, a personal knowing. And I think this is a knowing that I've heard from people who've had near-death experiences. It's certainly something that I've heard as a recurrent characteristic of spontaneous spiritual awakening experiences, even though they're not necessarily mediated through near-death experiences. It's a prevailing theme, that of loss of fear of death, because it's like a homecoming, and one returns to their natural state, which is one of fearlessness, boundlessness, infinity, presence, and purity, and just beauty, really.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing over and over. It must be one of the most like universal elements of spiritually transformative experiences, that loss of fear of death. Are you kind of familiar at all with like children with past life memories, the research that's gone on into that, specifically at the University of Virginia, and like mediumship and these kind of things? And I don't know if you're comfortable kind of talking about it a little bit, but again, do you have any thoughts on it? Any thoughts at all, really?
I don't really have much to say on it, other than I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Of course, we need to carry out these experiments with great rigor, because correlation does not necessarily imply causation. So we need to be careful when we look at, these kinds of experiences, and what we think, and our projections of what we think those experiences might be. Yeah. But having said that, who knows? Who knows? We could perhaps be taking over other people's, or past life experiences or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Nobody really does. What did you say? Sorry?
You have an interpretation on that.
Oh yeah, I could talk about that for hours. I don't know exactly what to make of it. I do think that it must be part of the equation somehow. I don't know exactly how it fits. And just as I was beginning to think, like, maybe I kind of have a little grasp on it at one point. Obviously, that was a naive thought. I even had that thought for a second. But again, I referenced Bruce earlier. I'm going to reference him again, because Bruce Grayson told me a couple of things that like totally threw spanners in the works of me starting to think I might have some kind of handle on it at all. And again, just to put it in perspective, like a year and a half ago, I thought this was utter nonsense, like all of this stuff. That was before looking into the research. But yeah, Bruce told me about like occasions where one child will remember, or two children will remember the same past life. Like they'll both have verified memories that point to exactly the same personality that was alive, which just like what we're supposed to do with that. And then it also, I think there's been instances where one child will have memories of two lives that were alive at the same time, which again, like it just makes everything so much more confusing, as if it wasn't already confusing enough and it's already hard enough to comprehend and to kind of wrap our little brains around. Like when you add in those kind of details, it's like, whoa, what do I even do with that now?
Oh, there's so much. Once you start delving into the world of, spiritual experiences, and, it's just, the world becomes infinite. There's no amount of inner and outer investigation that can possibly lead you to understand it all. And I'm certainly not, against the idea of past lives at all. I don't know if we're at the point yet to be able to unveil, the truths through the lens of, again, science. But it is certainly fascinating, and I'm willing to, I'm open-minded to whatever that might be about.
Yeah. I really want to get Dr. Jim Tucker on this podcast to talk to him about it, because I know they've got like thousands of cases of this that they've studied at the University of Virginia, and some of them are very compelling. Like some of them just like have like 55. I think there was one case, Ryan Hammond's, where he remembered 55, well, way more than 55 probably, but when it was all said and done, there were 55 facts that ranged from specific to kind of broader, but most of them were more specific, that they were verified as this personality that lived before. And it was a particularly compelling case because the mother of this boy Ryan reached out to Dr. Jim Tucker at Virginia, and was, before they had any clue of who this personality was, right at the beginning, in fact, she reached out to him, and so he was kept up to date with regular, she would send him emails and talk to him on the phone, I think, regularly. And so there was no kind of you can't really say like, oh yeah, they knew, they fed the child, this, that, and the other. And there was even, I think, a false dawn with this one, where like a TV company thought they had found the person that he used to be, and they like took him somewhere to go to visit his old house or his old workplace. And if you're faking it, you think the parents are going to be like, okay, right now, get all emotional and say this, oh yeah, this is it and stuff. But he was like, no, this isn't it. Like, it doesn't feel right and stuff. And then years later, they did find who it was, and he met the family, and I don't know. It's compelling. I still don't know really what to do with it, like you say. And there's so much more we don't know, but it's fascinating, and I just hope to see more research done into it, and I hope more people start to look at it seriously. And
for sure, no, it's fascinating.
Okay, one of the last things I want to ask you about before I let you go, Jess, is UFOs. That's another big topic for this podcast, like the three big topics, like one of the three. So again, I don't know if you know anything about it. I don't know if you keep up to date with any of the news around it at all. I don't know if you're even up to date or aware of much of what goes on in the UFO world, as it were. But tell me, what are you aware of? What do you think? Do you think UFOs? Are you aware of the reality of UFOs? Do you have any opinion on what they might be? Obviously, they're unidentified. But do you have any kind of more thoughts on it than that?
Well, I do know that my great uncle was a pioneering ufologist in Italy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
I've never met him, but my mum has told me about stories that when she used to go and visit him, and he'd have this room, proper old school room with like newspaper cuttings all over, and
awesome.
All these strings, anyway.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Jokes aside, I mean, it's true, but jokes aside.
Yeah.
I've actually seen a UFO, like an unidentified flying object.
Wow.
The sky when I was in a plane, and initially I thought, oh my God, no, I'm seeing things, right? But it was so obviously there. And then I actually asked the man who was sitting next to me, who I didn't know, I asked him to look out and tell me if he saw the same thing. Because I was, completely flabbergasted by what I saw. And he was like, oh my God, what is that? And then because we had internet on the plane, good old Norwegian Airlines, I was able to, I went online and I typed in, sort of the rough location where we were, and, what is this thing? And there was nothing on it. But basically what I saw is I was on the plane, and I was traveling from Copenhagen to Madrid, and it was pitch black, and we were above the clouds. We had been flying for about an hour and a half, so we were well above the clouds. And it was a very, there were lots of stars in the sky. So it wasn't overcast or anything like that. And in the distance, I saw an orb, very far away, an orb that was flashing such intense colors. And it was flashing white, and then it was flashing green, and then it was flashing blue, and then red and pink. And it was flashing all these different colors, but not at a specific
frequency,
not in a specific order or a specific tempo. It was really random, and it also the level of intensity was really random, because sometimes it would be really, this sort of star-looking or orb-looking thing would expulse this light really like rapidly and in a really, really strong way, and then at other times it would be a bit more bit less obvious. Anyway, I then took a video of it, and I rewatched it. I've got it on my phone actually. Wow. When you look at it, you can see this like shape-shifting orb, like this smoky orb with lots of different multicolors that just like it flickers, like a flickering orb. Wow. Multicolored flickering orb is what I would describe it as. And yeah, I mean, I'm not a connoisseur on UFOs, and I'm very interested in all of these things, but I'm not like, I don't spend time online looking up UFO type things. But I was so shocked when I saw that. And I tried sending my video to lots of different people, and nobody could tell me what it was. And then I showed it to one of my friends who was an astronomer, like a postdoc in astronomy. And when I told him that I had a really fascinating UFO video to show him, he laughed at me. But then when I showed it to him, he was like, "Oh my God, I don't know what that is." So, look, I don't know. I mean, it could have just been like a weird satellite that was reflecting light in a weird way, or it could have been a comet of some sort. But honestly, I mean, it stayed in the sky for the duration of the flight, from when I saw it, like 1.5 hours into the flight, until the end.
Did it stay in the same kind of position relative to where you were?
Exactly. It was always in the same position. And my friends were like, not having seen the video, they were like, it must have been, the light on the end of the wing. It was not the light at the end of a wing. I could see that light, and it was far beyond that.
Yeah.
Far beyond that. And like I said, I showed the guy next to me, and we were both like with our eyes glued to the glass, to the window, just watching this spectacle unfold. But it was so odd, because the plane conductor, nobody said anything on the speakerphone or anything, so it's very, very strange. But it wasn't like this massive orb. It was almost like a star that was shape-shifting in some way.
Yeah.
So weird.
So it was changing shape as well as like the flashing and stuff.
Yeah. Well, the flashes were like stronger sometimes, and then weaker at other times, and it looked like it was changing shapes. But when I look on the video, it obviously does change shapes. Again, there could be a distortion, like taking a video on my phone, but it's so odd. I can't.
Wow.
Yeah. Maybe I'll send you a video.
Yeah, please do. And how did you how did it make you feel? Did you feel anything? Did you feel like weird watching that? Did you feel like this is something different? Like, did you have kind of adrenaline or any different emotions?
It felt good. It didn't feel threatening. It just felt like I was just intrigued,
Yeah.
But like I said, I was in awe, and I was just staring at it the whole time.
Yeah.
Doing very little else. But yeah.
I guess you couldn't say how far away it was. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, not at all. It was like miles and miles and miles away. I don't know how far, because it was dark, and there were stars all around me, but it seemed to be a very, very, very far object. And in my mind, I was thinking, could it be like that they're testing nuclear explosions in space?
Yeah.
It just seemed very, very odd, and I still don't know what it was. And then I looked up some things like there's a specific group of stars that are very close to each other, and they can sometimes cause like an illusionary effect to the onlooker, but it didn't really look like what I saw online. So, you know.
No. And normally, if during the experience you're constantly questioning about what it is, I find it hard to imagine it would have been something so simple. But obviously the human mind is bizarre, and there can be plenty of crazy natural phenomena. But that does sound, it sounds amazing.
It was
I'm jealous.
It was something, maybe not aliens, but it was something.
It was something non-normal, I suppose.
Not maybe a comet or something, but again, it wasn't behaving in the way that a comet behaves. So I don't know.
No. There's not many comets that like match pace with an aircraft.
Exactly. It's just it's weird.
Yeah, that's very cool. But you've still got the video, you said, yeah?
I have the video, and I'm willing, if anybody in here is a, is a cosmologist or an astronomer or whatever.
Would you be happy for me to put it up on the screen during the episode, like the video, if we can?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you obviously have to.
That adds another layer of distortion, like.
Yeah.
Putting it from my camera and then zooming in and then putting it on it just might look very different to the way I saw it. So
yeah, fair enough. Well, let's see. You send it to me and then we'll see what it looks like. And obviously I'll check with you before we do anything, but yeah, that could be cool. Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's awesome. And I'm very jealous. When was that, did you say?
In 2016 or 2017. Yeah, 2016, probably June 2016.
Yeah. So just before that, I don't know if you are aware of the article that came out in the New York Times, like when they did this kind of, they published an article with the Tic Tac. Have you heard of the Tic Tac, the Nimitz? Yeah. So that was like,
remind me, because
Well, yeah, they published that and they came out with the video of that. They released the video of this kind of bizarre UFO. A UFO is still all it is. Some people think they can attribute it to some prosaic explanation, but no, as far not really.
We associate the word UFO with aliens, but it's just a UFO. It's an unidentifiable flying object, right? So.
Yeah. There's loads of different ways to speculate of things it could be that would be bizarre, that's not aliens. I do often think that interplanetary beings would be the simplest way of explaining it sometimes, but then I don't think that would explain everything that seems to kind of go around these phenomena. And I have heard people, I think it was Marjorie Woolacott, who I think she gave some kind of speculation that it could be something to do with consciousness, or she mentioned religion as well. I can't quite remember, but if anybody's wondering now, go and watch the episode of Marjorie. But there's so many different angles to kind of look at it. But it obviously could be multiple different phenomena taking place at once. Like, who's to say we're not being visited by some civilization or some thing from somewhere, and at the same time there's some unknown natural phenomena, and at the same time something else.
I think what's really important with all of these experiences, though, is to not necessarily feel like we need to go outside, of ourselves or of our realms of reality to explain anything that we can't, to explain the unexplainable.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I think that this reality is fascinating enough.
Yeah.
The fact that we exist on a flying rock in the middle of outer space. Yeah. It's fascinating. It's the greatest fantasy. It's the greatest mystery. It's more fantastical than any sort of UFO story you've ever heard, or any sort of alien story that we've ever heard. And I think it's just important to root back into what we do know, but just realize that that's freaking crazy. Like, our reality, our life, the fact that there are stars above our head and all around us, the fact that we don't know what's out there, we don't know what infinity even means, we can't fathom it. That's fascinating in itself. That's the biggest fantasy that could ever exist. So let's just remember that as well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. What is reality? What is it? What's it all about? Like that dream you had, what's the meaning of it all? Exactly. So I guess all that's left, Jessica, is for me to ask you if you have any last words you want to leave with anybody today, anybody watching or listening, any words of wisdom, any words of advice, anything at all. It doesn't have to fit any particular.
No, I'll just say thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Ben, for having me. It was a really interesting discussion. I enjoyed it.
My pleasure.
And I don't have any words of wisdom to give right now, but I would say if you are struggling to make sense of a spiritual experience, there are resources you can find. Ben, maybe you'll put them in the comment section below, or in the description section. I'll send them over to you.
Yeah.
Because I think that these experiences are worth being validated. Whether you've had a UFO experience or that kind of shifted your way of viewing reality, or whether you've had an alien encounter experience, or if you've had an awakening experience or Psi Phenomena, just feel free to, you can get in touch with myself, but you can also consult these resources and be put in touch with like-minded people. So there are other people like yourself out there who share your view.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
Awesome. So yeah, send me all of that, and yeah, I'll put it all in the description, so anybody interested, scroll down and it's all should be there. So yeah, thank you again, Jessica. Thank you so much. This was awesome. This was so much fun. I've taken up way more of your time than I told you I would, but I've really enjoyed it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with the impressive Jessica Corneille. Hopefully it brought you some new knowledge or helped you to feel less alone if you've been going through a similar experience. Please see the description for all the relevant links and more information. If you have feedback, we're always happy to hear it in the comments. Please consider subscribing to continue unraveling the universe with us. Thank you.